Okay, we are now. Okay, I'm recording it now. So if you have any private conversations, show up here too. All right. So last time we had done just the early days of the American Jewry. I just to clarify, the original ones obviously were Dutch Jews because New York was New Amsterdam. It was ruled over by the Dutch. So the Jews came, those first 23 Jews came in 1654. But by 1664, the British sent a very large fleet up the Hudson, and the Dutch gave it back over to the British. So after that became a British colony. So the Jews then coming to the New World and to the Caribbean, including the Caribbean, were more and more English Jews. So if you were established and had your connections back in Holland, with the Dutch there, you would have had help from the Esnoga, which is the main Spanish Portuguese show in Amsterdam. It's actually a gorgeous, gorgeous building. And all the other Spanish Portuguese shows, similar layout. But at a later date, there are British Jews who are coming, and they're going to settle in Savannah, Georgia, and Charleston, South Carolina. And so their connection will be with Bevis Marks, which is the oldest Spanish Portuguese show in London. So if you're ever reading an article that's talking about even some of the Jews actually it's Caribbean, like they were the Carib Indians. They would have gotten help with Sifrei Torah. They would have sent them Chazan, from their congregation to the New World to help out these fledgling, congregations that were being founded. All right. So the most of the Jews coming initially will be in northern, South America, all those Guianas, right? And the Dutch one's called Suriname, and then all over the Caribbean, they're going to be settling, and then North America, which of course will end up being the largest, settlement of Jews. But it's going to be a very gradual process. Those Jews who came, in the 1600s, some of them don't stay, and ultimately they go back, right, either to Holland or England. If things, are too difficult for them. But there will be increasing immigration all through the 1700s. So, for example, like Shevet Israel, which is the oldest Spanish Portuguese synagogue, the oldest in America, North America, that was actually its first building was not until the 1700s. They had a little congregation. They would have met in somebody's home. They didn't have their own building, right? And that's, when, as I say, things began to expand tremendously. But I wanted to go back to Europe because during the same time period, there are going to be a lot of great Rabbanim. You will recognize some of their names if you've gone to lectures. You will hear them float out their names. If you should read an article, let's say Jewish Action, put out by the OU, if anything coming out of YU, I know, do they distribute here like that Torah to go, like they give one for each holiday. They give it out in Southfield too. It's in the show. But there's some very, very scholarly articles in there, and they're going to be quoting a lot of the Rabbanim here. So I think it's very fascinating. Otherwise, it's like just floating. All these names just floating around. And who are these people? Where did they come from? When did they live? So now we're just dealing with 18th century, and then gradually we'll get to the 19th century. The first person whose name I have down here is known as Shagas Aryeh. I don't have a lot of information about him, but his real name is Rabbi Aryeh Leib Gunsberg. He was actually a contemporary of the Vilna Gaon, so we know he's in the 1700s. He wrote this book. Most of these men will become known by their Sfarim, not by their actual names. I mean, do you ever hear Ryan Leib Gunsberg? No, but you might have heard the Shagas Arya quoted. He wrote this book and it was a very respected work of responsa, Torah, novella. That just means various anecdotes and comments right on the Torah. He actually taught, he was the early teachers of Chaim Volozhin. Chaim Volozhin is the prime student of the Vilna Gaon, eventually the Volozhin Yeshiva, founded by him. And he wrote two others for him. I mean, I'm not familiar with them, but one's called Geruras Ari and one's called Turul Even. And these are commentaries on the Gemara, on the Talmud. Okay. Now, the next person, I'm sure that you must have heard of him. His name is Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, and he is the Noda B'Yehuda, who's quite well known. I have his dates there. He lived his entire life in that 18th century. He was also contemporary of the Vilna Gaon. He was a Rav of Prague. So he's from Czechoslovakia. And he wrote his responsa are called Noda B'Yehuda, and that's why he is known by that. You won't necessarily see Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, but you will see quotations for the Noda B'Yehuda. He was able to trace his lineage to Rashi. Actually, my Zeta did the same thing, but it's like as convoluted as through a son-in-law, like, oh, it's not necessarily a direct. We're probably all will figure out that we're related to Rashi, or something. We're all certainly, or that you're from David, and we're all related to Avraham. That's for sure. In his time period, he was recognized as the greater halachic authority. I should say one of them. Obviously, if he was the Vilna Gaon, I would say he was brilliant man. But the Noda B'Yehuda also, even in his own time, was recognized as being a great scholar. He wrote, again, his Noda B'Yehuda, responsa means she'elot teshuvot, people from communities, not just necessarily in the country where they resided, but from all over the Jewish world, would send in queries about issues of halacha. They didn't know how to handle them. They would write them to these renowned rabbanim, and then they would get to shuvo. They would get replies and answers. So somebody obviously at a certain point compiles them all and has them published. He wrote this other book called Tzion L'Nefesh Chaya. And I guess these are commentaries on the Gemara. Now he was, I thought this was interesting, that last paragraph. It says, a lot of these people coming from, that Lithuanian, Polish world, they were very anti-Hasidim. This is a part of that Misnagdisha movement. But apparently he still, and again, for his brilliance, he was still respected by the Hasidim, even though denouncing them. It says Rabbi Schneur Lauman of Vladimir Baltani wrote, he was highly precise and he never failed to arrive at the truth concerning each one of his halachic decisions. So even though, you have to be able to be humble enough to recognize that even though you're just great disagreement with somebody else, but if you recognize your brilliance, interpreting halacha, you're still giving them credence. Here's one other individual. I think we might have mentioned him in the past, but I'm putting him all together. As you can see, he was born in 1680, so he's part of the 17th century. He was only 20 years old, at the end of that century. So he's living the bulk of his life, and his contributions are going to be in the 18th century. That's Pnei Yehoshua. His real name is Rabbi Yaakov Yehoshua Falk. And he was also a great commentator on the Talmud, on the Gemara, and he was his grandson of this Rabbi Yehoshua ben Yosef of Krakow, who wrote the Beginei Shlomo. This is I think it's 1702, so he's a young man. He's only like 22 years old, right? He was born in 1680. Rabbi Yehoshua's wife and daughter were killed in a terrible fire, and he himself nearly died. He vowed that if Hashem would spare him, he would devote himself completely to diligent and profound Torah study. He was miraculously saved and thereafter fulfilled this vow. So he's devoting himself now completely, to mastering the Torah, the commentaries, the Gemara, etc., etc. He wrote this book. This is the result of, all his studies and then his own personal comments. And his sefer is called Pnei Yehoshua, and it consists of lots of very incisive commentary on many tractates of the Gemara. It's considered it's a 3-volume work, and it's a basic study guide by more advanced yeshiva students. So anybody studying for smicha would obviously be familiar with the Pnei Yehoshua. Now, remember, this is the time period of Shabtai Tzvi. So he was vociferously opposed to this Shabtai Tzvi movement. And in 1722, he actually put them into cherem, as did others. But, this is what's happening. So, so just to give you a picture of what's happening in the 18th century. So first we have 1648-49, Gezerot Tachletat, those awful attacks upon the Jews by the Cossacks from the Ukraine. That Khmelnytsky, right? He was leader, Bogdan Khmelnytsky. And then following that, we had the arrival on the scene of Shabtai, who claimed that he was Mashiach. He was going to bring everybody back to Israel. And then in the end, he eventually finds his way to Constantinople, and he converts to Islam. Some great leader. So how very disappointing to the Jews. I mean, Jews from all over Europe, even Western Europe, were so enthused with his ideas and really believed this man was the Mashiach. And as a result, the people were in such a state of despondency. And this is when the Hasidic movement took off. So this would be then the time period of the Baal Shem, and then many other various Hasidic sects. One time I'll do a thing on various Hasidic sects and where they were. I mentioned their names, but maybe we'll do something a little more in depth about that. Most of the people I'm talking about now are not Hasidic, or not sure. Okay. Let me see. Then we'll talk about the Chacham Tzvi. But his real name is Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Ashkenazi. Now, look, you can see really he spent 40 years of his life in the 17th century. So I'm saying it's hard to determine which century to put some of these Rabbanim, because they do, bridge, a turn of the century. But he lived up until 1718. He was a contemporary of the Pnei Yehoshua, and also was a great Torah scholar, and he wrote numerous responses. They all did. I mean, we had found, my father had taken them back to the house from my Zeta, Shayla wrote that he had with Rabbanim back in Lithuania, which were then stolen. Very unscrupulous. Baltimore. Yes. No, they would have written in Hebrew. Hebrew. This was the language that which all scholarly works, are written there. No, Yiddish was considered a jargon, for the women. You're speaking in the marketplace. You would speak it to one another. But when you're talking about something, Torah scholarship, no, you are writing in Hebrew. And so they're actually, if you know Hebrew, they're actually easy to understand. It's not modern Hebrew. It's more like a biblical Hebrew. So if you've grown up learning the Chumash, you will be able to read their writing. Very, very beautiful. I mean, I think I've mentioned this too in the past, like the Rambam centuries before. He wrote his Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah is the most beautiful Hebrew. But obviously he's speaking Spanish. He grew up, in Spain, and then he lived in Egypt. He's that wasn't the language he would have spoken to his wife, on a daily basis. But when he was writing something dealing with the Torah or common, lacha, that's and he always a beautiful, beautiful. So the Chacham Tzvi, let's see what we're talking about him. He wrote numerous Shelotim Teshuvot. Look, he got inquiries coming from London, right? So this would have been members of Shalom Shul, Bevis Marks, let's say. People weren't sure how to handle something. Lublin, that's Poland, Hamburg, Germany, and Italy. I don't have a specific town. Maybe numerous Italian Jews would have written to him. And this was published under the title, when it was finally compiled, Chacham Tzvi. So that he's known as a Chacham. He also was very much opposed to the Shabtai Tzvi movement. And just telling his Shabtai Tzvi converted Islam 1667, and he finally died in prison. It's the Sultan in Constantinople, no use for this crazy guy, and he died in 1670. So he actually might have been released at the end, but that's where he ended up. Okay, another very famous person. Now we have mentioned him before because he was engaged in a lot of awful, controversies with other rabbanim from his time period, and so I look a little askance upon him, even though he was considered a great scholar. And that's Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who lived just at the very end of that 17th century, mostly in the 18th century, and he's known as the Yavit. He was the most prominent of three sons of the Chacham Tzvi. So now you can see how one is related to another. In an earlier generation, a lot of the sons of were very great scholars. Obviously that it would have been a Rav, and he had his yeshiva, and his best student, he would have married also one of his daughters. But this is a natural descendant, actual son of him. He was a very prolific author. He published many things and very strong views. He was a tough guy, and he also fought. Oh yes, right. He spoke about, or I don't know, was JJ Factor here and spoke about it, or I know I've heard in our show, lectures on it. He also fought against this Shabtai Tzvi movement. Then he becomes, this is what he's known for. He became involved in this huge dispute with this Rabbi Yonasan Eibishitz. He also sort of like sullied his reputation, even though he's a fine person, because he suspected him of having pro-Shabtai Tzvi leanings. And this lasted for 14 years, back and forth argument, 1751 to 1764. And this threatened to divide the Jewish community to two camps. So I'm not going, I had studied it more in depth, at an earlier point when I was going through the history, but I just wanted to bring up his name again. He wrote a commentary on the Mishnah called Lechem Shamayim. There's a book of his response that is published called Sheilat Yavitz, and he wrote a commentary on this Siddur, and it's called Siddur Beit Yaakov. Okay, now the person that he had the huge dispute with was his Rabbi Yonasan Eibishitz. And that's from 1690, 1764. He was also a brilliant scholar and published numerous Sfarim, but he had this awful controversy. Look, it lasted for 14 years, they said. So it's sort of, it really ended up sullying his reputation for a while. Decided with Rabbi Yaakov Emden, he thought, oh, this awful person, when in fact he's not. Never. But eventually he is recognized that he was a great Gaon, he was a tzaddik, and he was he came out with great commentary. He wrote Halacha Kosher Mishpat. It's divided into sections, so some certain rabbanim would be known more for writing a particular section, or also on Yoredea. He wrote Sforman Hilchos Midah. Hilchos Pesach, and he also wrote commentary on the Rambam's Hilchos Ishus. What's that mean, Ishus? Marital thing? Relations. Okay. Okay, so I figured. Okay. And again, they're all considered to be very great works of halachic literature, and they're considered to be classics. But Nebuch, he had hanging over him this awful dispute because his other Rabbi Yaakov Emden kept on, criticizing him. I think at one point people were coming to Rabbi Ibichus, and maybe he was, I don't remember if he gave out any amulets or something, whatever, it was Rabbi Yaakov, you know, highly critical of him. And it was really pretty ugly. He also, we'll come to him a little while. Rabbi Yaakov Emden also had a big dispute with the Rabbi Shechem Sada, which today is revered, for his book Mesilat Yesharim, Path of the Just, and also, but if you take out something as by Rabbi Yaakov Emden, I mean, he is regarded. He was a scholar, except he had a very strong personality, and on getting disputes and accusing people of leaning towards Shabtai, even though it wasn't true. Okay, the next person we're going to discuss is the Pri Megadim. His real name is Rabbi Yosef Te'olim. He lives completely in the 18th century, and again he wrote works, commentary on the Talmud and the Torah. But he's remembered the most because for this book that was published called Pri Megadim. What was it? It was a comprehensive commentary on almost every Shach and Taz and Yoreh De'ah. If you will remember, we had to at the end of last year. The Shach and Taz are like the preeminent, commentaries. First, you have the Shulchan Aruch. Even the Shulchan Aruch itself is big, but okay. But then there were commentaries, and it's interesting when Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he viewed it that it would be a shorter type of halacha. But there's this huge body of work of commentary on the Shulchan, that has since followed. So you wouldn't just study the Shulchan Aruch, you're also going to all the Meforshim, on it. So two of the preeminent ones, right, of that previous century, that was the Shach and the Taz, and particularly on Yoreh De'ah. Also another swarm. But this man is now writing a commentary on their commentary. So again, this particular commentary, the Pri Megadim, is actually divided like in two parts, and there's one on which he's commenting on the Shach, and it's called Sifsei Das, and then when he's commenting on Taz, he's called Mishpatot Zahav. Okay. He also did write another paper on the division of the Shulchan Aruch. And there he's writing comments on, again, but also the Magen Avraham. And you can't study the Shulchan Aruch without, somebody who's really delving into it. Okay. And this is also divided into two separate Sfarim, Mishpatot Zahav. Everything doing the same with Zahav has stands for. And he wrote another sefer called Esher Avraham on the Magen Avraham comments on the Shulchan Aruch. Because it's like layer upon layer, and that's how it feels till this very day. That's what, like a great Rav, if Shiloh comes to him, he has to go back. He might go back perhaps to that original source, the Shulchan Aruch, but then he's always going to look at commentaries on that same topic by later great Rabbanim and scholars. Just to mention this man, his name is Rav Nosson Adler. I personally was not familiar with him before this. He lived all the way to the 1800s, so at the cusp of the 19th century. He was known as an Eloi. He was a brilliant man. He established yeshiva in Frankfurt, and among his Talmidim was this Rabbi Moshe Sofer, that Chassam Sofer. We'll learn more about the Chassam Sofer, but I'm going to put him in the category of very late 18th century, early 19th century. As you see, he was born in 1762, but he lives in 1839, so it's 40 years, into the 19th century. Um, and obviously, there were problems dealing with kashrus and decision making, and so he had a big dispute with the members of the Frankfurt. I presume this is Frankfurt on Main that they're talking about. So obviously, after this lovely dispute that he had, he then went and took a job as a rav in Boskowitz, Moravia. Moravia is that's the eastern part of Czechoslovakia. And what's it called now today? So the Czech Republic is the western half, that's where Prague is, and then Slovakia thing. Okay. Now the Chassam Sofer, regarded Rabbi Adler, with great respect. Rebbe, so he's the fancy word is Rebbe Muvhak, right? That's his primary teacher. And he actually accompanied him to Moravia. And the Chassam Sofer regarded him as one of the most illustrious scholars of his generation. Yes, right. Now, next person, also completely in the 18th century, Rabbi Moshe Margoliot. He's known for his comment. The next two Rabbanim that are mentioned here, again, I wasn't as familiar with it. They both wrote commentaries on the Talmud Yerushalmi, right, which came out of before the Talmud Bava. It's not a scholar, it's not long, So in any case, the next two men wrote commentaries on the Talmud Yerushalmi. And they're called the Pnei Moshe and Mar'eh HaPanim. He clarifies the basic meaning of the text, like Rashi would do in Talmud. When a young man first, child, when they first start learning Gemara, right, in the Yeshiva, Shabbos, and you're going to look at the basic text and make sure the Gemara. But then you always do it first with the Rashi. The Rashi will help to explain it very good. Then you would move on to the generations after Rashi, and then you'll go on and But that's what you would say. So for the Yerushalmi, you would look at this Pnei Moshe, the basic commentary. And the Yerushalmi help you understand all the different words. He compares the text of the Yerushalmi, parallel texts in the Talmud Bavli. That was good. I always loved it. Trying to reconcile any differences that he would see between the two Gemaras. And he draws heavily upon the Tosefta, to help clarify passages. Yerushalmi is not as easy to understand. Not that but it's written more clearly in a more understandable fashion than the Yerushalmi. So even like a basic yeshiva student would study the Bavli. It's not going to study the Yerushalmi. Only like scholars of a higher level, then they'll study the Yerushalmi. And they can do the same thing, compare and contrast. They can learn from that. I thought this is look at that middle paragraph. It says, where Rabbi Moshe approached the task of clarifying the order of Zvaim, which deals with the laws of agriculture. And the Talmud Bavli does not comment on that. Talmud Bavli, you're in Babylonia. You're not commenting on laws dealing with agriculture in the land of Israel, already in Golis. But Talmud Yerushalmi was written in Israel. Wasn't written necessarily in Yerushalayim, but it's just called that. But it's written in Israel and there. I mean, you'll find the names of some Rabbanim in both Gemaras. They did travel one from the other, or they'll be quoted one, from depending. I love it when you're reading the Talmud Bavli and they talk about Israel as the West. To say some raw, we came from the West. You came from Israel. So look at this. So this was a very complicated thing. He's not living in Israel. He's not so familiar. So he took a course in botany at the University of Frankfurt in the year 1770. He was almost 70 years old at that time. Kol hakavod. You can keep on learning. He served as the Rebbe to the Vilna Gaon when he was a little popular. And interesting, another little point about the Vilna Gaon. By the time he turned 7 years old, he was such a person. He no longer had a Rebbe. Like he learned on his own. Just unbelievable. Okay. Another person who wrote a commentary on the Yerushalmi, his name is Rabbi David Frankel. And his commentary is called the Korban HaTorah. He wrote a standard commentary, also 2 parts. So the first part is just like a Rashi like commentary, explaining the words. It's easy to follow. But then he wrote a second part called Shining Korban. He discusses the Yerushalmi, but in the Tosfos like fashion, trying to dig into more complicated sugyos topics that are being discussed. And he tried then to reconcile difficulties, any discrepancies. And apparently, I don't believe it. One thing I can guess is not the only, which is not Talmud falsely, but apparently in the Yerushalmi, you can find some of his commentaries, but only on Shim. Okay, now we're going to talk about some great Sephardic Rabbanim from this time period. Some you will recognize, others were like the two, but they all have interesting stories and backgrounds, so I will share that with you. Okay, so now again, look at this. He lives a big chunk of his life in the 17th century, but then is into the 18th century. Rabbi Yehuda Rosanis, and I guess he's called the Mishnah Lamela. And apparently, if you come from a Sephardic background, he's considered adult, in the Sephardic world. He was a Rav in Constantinople. So, I don't want you to think we're talking a lot about the Jews in Europe, and these become a lot of the most famous, Rabbanim. But, in that Sephardic world, not Shalom Western Sephardim, but, the Eastern Sephardim, the ones that spread throughout the Ottoman Empire. And there were great scholars here. So if you have a Sephardic background, you would revere some of these Rabbanim. And again, he was, in his time and after. So I guess if you come from Turkey, you would recognize him. Scholar. That work of his, Mishnah Lamela, is considered one of the classic commentaries on the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. And I mean, I do so. I don't know. I have to look. It says since the 1739 edition of the Rambam, when it was published, it surrounds the text of the Rambam and almost all printed versions of the Mishnah Torah. He's a very humble person. He didn't want his Shema to be published while he was still alive, but he had a student, his name, we'll learn more about her in a minute, Rabbi Yaakov Kuli. So he prepared everything for publication. He wanted people to know, to learn about these chidushim, interpretations. This Rabbi Yaakov Kuli also arranged and published his teacher's homiletical essays called Al Parashat Derachim. I mean, these would have been from like sermons, that he would have published. They gained great popularity, and the book also includes a word called Derech Mitzvotecha. So it's hard. I mean, I'm speaking as far as I did, even though it's all written process. And deals with the Minyan HaMitzvot, which are the enumeration of the Taryag Mitzvot, which you can find though in other works. The Rambam talks about the Taryag Mitzvot, the Ramban, right? Nachmanides, the Smak, we learned him earlier, and Sefer HaChinuch, which nowadays I would say most people would say and again, his works are very highly regarded, and they have been reprinted. Again, I had never heard of this individual, but again, I think part of the world, that Ottoman world, you would have revered him as a great scholar. The next person you probably have heard, but not by his name. His name is Rabbi Yaakov. Uh, you see, look at he was a very young man when he died. He was like 42 years old, 43. But this is a Me'am Loev. And I use, I teach a Novi class on Mondays. For BRS members. And the Me'am Loev has such wonderful insights, like I would just finish Malachim that I always use the Me'am Loev, and I knew that he was part of that. I didn't know so much about it, and here I found out what his real name is. Rabbi Yaakov Kuli. He was born in Jerusalem in the year 1689. And if you remember there's a whole controversy about starting up a Sanhedrin in Israel and then giving granting of smicha. Anyways, so his grandfather on his mother's side was his Rabbi Moshe, and he traced his lineage to this Rabbi Yaakov ibn Taviv, who wrote Ein Yaakov. So and he was involved again with this controversy. With the Rav from Tzfat. I don't know if you remember that. In any case, but he then traveled to Constantinople to publish his grandfather's manuscript. And he studied there under this Rav, we mentioned his name just a while ago, Rabbi Yehuda Rosanis. And when Rav Zanis passed away, Rav Kuli published his teacher's manuscripts, right? And he added his own comments in brackets. He then wrote Me'am Loev, which is really a brilliant, anthology. But you'll see what I learned from this. He didn't write all, like I told you, I was doing the Me'am Loev dealing with Nevi'im. He only wrote it on Chumash, and even not even all of it includes. And he has sections there. He deals with halachic issues as part of his commentary. And he always adds, I always love the footnote, learn so much more. And he'll say if he's describing a particular passage, an interpretation, that he includes, quotes from the Gemara on this same topic, the Midrash, so, includes some interesting stories, and the Zohar, right? Who's interested in Kabbalah. He died really at the young age of 42, but his work was completed by other Rabbanim, two in particular. I didn't write their names. I think it might, with all these different names. Just know there were two. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Oh, interesting. Right. But I happen to love that commentary. It's wonderful. On occasion, some of the comments, I think misogynistic a bit, identify women, but it was written at a different age. Listen, I'm doing the Daf Yomi, boy, let me tell you some of those statements. Well, we're just looking over them. We're looking for those things that we feel have universal application. And it quickly gained acceptance as a classic Torah anthology. Now, I only heard of the Me'am Loev, so to speak, in more recent years. So I don't know how acceptable it was in Ashkenazi communities initially, again, because it's put out by a Sephardic scholar. So you would find it in Sephardic tomes, and originally was written in Ladino. Remember, he comes from Turkey. Again, Ladino is the language of the Eastern Sephardim, like Shalom's thing, the Western Sephardim. They are not speaking Ladino whatsoever. So it's only from those Jews. And when I said the Ottoman Empire was huge, so it would have been parts of North Africa, Egypt, possibly parts of the Middle East, Turkey, Greece, Bulgaria. The first Sephardic Jews to settle in Rochester, where I come from, they used to call them the Turks. I mean, they were from like Bulgaria, but they called them the Turks. I think you could when they came in the early 1900s. Um, so, but we unfortunately, the Ashkenazi persuasion used to have a look down upon as far as, as wilder element. Any case, um, and but now it's been translated first into Hebrew, and now it's in English. Uh, yes, yes, right. Yeah. Also, yeah. Yeah. But look how much these men accomplished in, relatively. What could they have added had our lives if they lived longer? Um, we have mentioned him before, but I'm going to mention him again now because he comes from Italy, but I guess he's considered to be a more Sephardi than Ashkenazi. That's Rabbi Chaim Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. Look, also, he did not live to be old at all. Oh, they're very young. And he's called the Ramchal, which stands for Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, okay, abbreviation. He grew up in Padua, Italy, and he had a very good background, very good education. He knew Talmud, and he also studied Kabbalah. A lot of these Rabbanim were Kabbalah. So in 1727, this is why I think he got into this big, huge dispute with the Yavits because of his study of Kabbalah. He claimed he heard the voice of a Maggid who taught him the secrets of the Kabbalah. When this came to the attention of Rabbi who was very much opposed to the Shafarites, so he suspected the Ramchal becoming another Mashiach Sheker, another false Messiah. Whoa, the plan and this caused a lot of unfounded controversy around some of his Kabbalistic teachings and his writings. So he had to leave Italy. There was just so much opposition there, and he moved to Amsterdam. There was a much more liberal city, and there he wrote his famous work, Mesilat Yesharim. And people, it's studied today. It's a brilliant work, and it's called Path of the Trust English. And it's considered one of the classics of ethical Musar literature. And if in a particular yeshiva, they have a course of study on Musar, they would definitely study just a little bit about the Mesilat Yesharim. His introduction, he observes primary purpose of this work to place emphasis upon well-known Musar concepts, which individuals have to forget. So, it's not enough just to study halacha and pour over the Gemara or the Shulchan Aruch, find the ethical components of Judaism. But this can only be done. You can only have a true fear of Hashem, Yirat Shemayim, if you have industrious soul and diligent Muslims over a sustained period of time. It's not like you can just take 1 week, you're going to study Musar. No, this is the thing, and you have to apply it to life, day by day. And he concludes every individual should spend time regularly for serious introspection, right? And making a balance sheet of accountability for the soul. He wrote other Sfarim. It's interesting. He and his family, he obviously left Amsterdam at a certain point. He and his family died in a plague in Akko in 1747. There was actually from other Rabbanim that we have studied in the past, there was actually a pretty vibrant Jewish community in the city of Akko. We tend to think of it as Arab town, although there was a Jewish part outside of the old walls, like it's Jewish, but I think of it, I haven't loved touring there. There are layers and layers, Roman excavations and Crusader excavations, but there had been a very active Jewish community. The next person, hopefully you've heard of him. I know Rabbi Goldberg might love to quote him, but now he's gone further afield. Other people, but he used to quote the Or HaChaim, and his real name is Rabbi Chaim Attar. And he's a Sephardic Jew. but he ended up in McGraw's Gedola. He was born in Morocco, but there was so much persecution. Life in North Africa was not easy for the Jews over the next several centuries, so he eventually leaves. Um, he did write important for him on the Gemara also, and Halacha, but he's best remembered because he wrote this commentary on the Chumash called right or Hacha. It's now considered a standard. It's not like a Rashi or a Ramban, but he has very interesting insights, and it's in the Mikros Gedolas Chumash. It's interesting. So his commentary is, I mean, now it is obviously in Ashkenazi places. We'll study it too, but I guess years ago, you would find it more in Hasidic and Sephardic yeshiva, more so. He became widely known. He's actually called then Or HaChaim HaKadosh. And he finally settled in Yerushalayim, but he died at a very young age of, 47, right? Unfortunately. Then we'll do one more. We might finish up next week. Star Shalom Sharabi. I mean, I know my daughter has a friend whose last name is Sharabi. So I mean, I never heard of this particular individual. Also from the 18th century, he was one of the great Kabbalists. He was born in Yemen. So interesting. So my son-in-law is Yemenite extraction, and he talks about. I mean, he was born in Israel, but his parents came from near Sana. So interesting. And then he became head of this yeshiva, Beit Hel. This is in Yerushalayim. So just an interesting. I chose this book because the name Sharabi. That's my daughter's friend. Yeah. Oh, it is. Oh, okay. And yeah. But I had never heard of the name again until my, friends with him. So you know what? It's already 10. Should I go a few more minutes? See how long the next rub is. We'll do one more before we come to the next. The next two more we have a pretty very well known rub. So the next one I want to talk about is Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Al-Ghazi. Again, look, he spent for the first 20 years of his life, he's in the 17th century. The rest of his life, he's in the 18th century. He was born in Izmir, Turkey, and he came from a long line of Torah scholars. He was known as a great tzaddik, also a Kabbalist. So I like to put in interject these like personal. At the age of 60, he was taken critically ill, and the doctors gave him only a few more days to live. So then the name Yisrael, it was called Yaakov, right? Was added to his name, and we do that to this day. He vowed that if Hashem would restore him to health, he would publish one of the many Sfarim he had written. In a month's time, he was completely healed. A miracle. And he appointed, and wait, get the page here. And he immediately set out to fulfill his vow. He published a sefer. It's called Chemdas Hayamim, contains Musar, as well as laws and customs regarding tefillah. He later settled in Yerushalayim, and he was appointed the Rav there and Rosh Masifta, the yeshiva there. And he wrote many additional sforim. He's a rebbe of his son, I guess, and the Chidah. The Chidah is quite well known. We'll do him next. The Chidah condensed and published Rebbe's work called Emes Yaakov, which deals with the halachos of Sefer Torah, and he renamed it Emes. Okay, we'll do the Chidah next time because I think he, in his own right, is a pretty well-known individual, and you might have encountered his name also reading articles or hearing lectures. Okay, very good. Everybody should be well. Stay safe. And in your session, I will see you guys next week. All right. Let me just turn this off. Oh, my great pleasure. What happens if Carla Alkali? I can't remember if he's on this list or not. I'll have to check it out. He's not. Yeah, but I'm not sure what his years are. He might be at a little later date. So that's why I wouldn't have mentioned them. Right, thank you. Right. Right, well, again, because if you grow up in the Ashkenazi world, you don't talk so much about the great scribim. Yeah, they would. Wow, amazing.